unmute myself. There we go. Sorry, guys. Okay, so the track you could hear playing in the intro then was Hardwave from the Ostinato EP, an EP which I wrote in conjunction with Jason from Discrete Deceit, who used to be known as the San Fernando Sound. Jason and I have known each other for probably over 15 years now, something along those lines. We've started making music together a long time ago after a drunken conversation about drum machines at an after party where I was DJing many years ago. And the Ostinato EP began life at a villa in Ibiza when we were there, following a night out at Pike's Hotel to see DJ Harvey play at his Mercury Rising night. I think it was a bit of a musical revelation for both of us, and I think it certainly influenced the way that the music that I wanted to be making from that point moving forwards. So we started that at the villa, and then we developed the other 3 tracks around it, one of them being this track, Hardwave. So let's get straight into it, not mess about. Sorry about the technical issues before, but we are now back. I'm going to fling you over to Ableton. There we go. So what I thought we'd talk about first is the evolution of the track, because obviously the final version of the track, kill those inserts on it there first, sounds like there's a bit of a lag and everything because I've got that many things running. Sounds like this, so it's clear, it's detailed, it's punchy, it's quite loud, but there's still a lot of headroom in the WAV. I like mixing with lots of headroom, something I've found myself doing over the years. Just gives the mastering engineer a bit more option to pump things up when they need to. This track was finally mastered by a guy called Bitfunk, who does the mastering for Gold Room and Little Boots as well. He's a fantastic mastering engineer and an awesome all-round producer as well. You should really check out his stuff. I'll put his link either in the down below on YouTube or on the final slide of this video as well. This record came out on Electronic Rumours Records, which is a super cool label run by the awesome Clive, who we love. Big love, Clive. So that's the final version. Let's talk about the first version of this track. Now, this track initially came to life when Jason brought around one of his synthesizers, with the intention being that we were gonna write a couple of other tracks to go around this original track that we'd started in Ibiza. And he brought down his Dave Smith Mofo X4 synthesizer, which is not quite how I remember it. I thought he brought down his Bass Station Mark II, but he brought down the Mofo X4 because he'd originally written this bass line part, the first long sustained bass line part, using his Juno 106 synthesizer. Jason's got a fantastic collection of vintage and cool synthesizers, some really cool analog ones, some really good digital ones as well. And he wrote this on the Juno 106. Juno 106 is nowhere near as portable as a Mofo X4, so he brought that round to my studio and we recorded it up. And that initially sounded like this part here. So I'm assuming that everybody who's watching knows a little bit about Ableton or a little bit about DAWs already. So as you can see, this first export track here is actually a group track comprising all the parts and just the bass. So I'm going to play you just the bass for now, so you can hear the initial idea that we brought around. Some sort of nice enveloping on the filter cut off there through the sustained sound. And the eagle-eyed of you will have spotted a little marker I've got at the top that says bass recording glitch. Now, partway through writing this track, I kind of realised that there was a glitch somewhere in this recording. There's an ever so slightly audible pop in the recording, and we couldn't work out where it was for the life of us. So I'm just going to turn off follow there. Let's see if we can find that. There you go. Did you catch it? There you go. It's very slight but very noticeable, and once you've heard it you can't unhear it, and I was focusing on that every time I came to tackle this track. We got around that eventually by copying and pasting a later section and doing some filter envelope control using some filter cutoff control on the native Ableton filter. But there was a while where I was wrestling with that, and we were doing all sorts with it, like trying to fire it through Isotope RX to see if we could establish where this little glitch was in the frequency range, and just pluck it out using the magic that is Isotope RX. But we got around it using more conventional methods. So that's the bass line, and then we've got some other parts as well, comprising the main intro riff. So, you know, it does sound really, really crude and really demo-y. I find with tracks that I work on, certainly anyway, that early stages are always like this, where you've got to have a bit of imagination and think, well, I'm going to amend this part in that way, I'm going to change those drums in that way, I'm going to have these effects, this is the processing I'm going to put on it to make it bigger and fuller, this is the reverberation I'm going to use. So you've got to have a bit of imagination. As you can see, it does sound quite basic. What I would say though is we went out for my 40th birthday, a lot of people, and we had a lot of people back to our house, which is where my studio is, and there must have been sort of 7, 8, 9 people in the studio, and we put this on, and people were visibly animated. So even though it was a really rough, dog rough version of the track, we kind of knew we were onto something, and it was definitely worth working on. But this is how it sounded at that point. Let's get to the staccato bass. Very demo-y, very rough, no EQ, no compression, no processing, no nothing. Rough as they say. So that was the first export that I did, and then what we generally do is share these using, some kind of cloud service. So the second export, again, look at the headroom on that. So you can imagine when I send Jason these tracks to listen to, he has to turn up his system quite loud to get the full effects. Let's try and go for that. A bit more like, isn't it? A bit more powerful. Now I'm gonna tab into my push as well to do some soloing. So that was the second export. Now I don't know what happened to the third export, but it goes straight to the fourth export, which is the next channel down. So let's subtly different, a bit cleaner, just refining that mix ever so slightly every time between all these iterations. When I'm doing mix downs as well, I will have the last version on a channel muted that I can press solo on using some key mapping, so I can compare between the two versions really quickly to check that it actually is moving in the right direction and it's not making it worse doing the processing and the things that I'm doing to the various stems. So from the fourth to the final, you can feel that's a lot bassier. I don't know what kind of system you're listening on. You might be on a small speaker, but on these pretty decent headphones, I can feel the noticeable bump in the bass frequencies in that version then. That's where the power comes from in dance music, isn't it? Let's face it. Okay, so that's previous versions, and we've heard the synthesizer part that Jason brought down, that this began from and stemmed from. Just to go back a step and talk about Jason's writing process. Jason can write full tracks on the back of a napkin. And then bring them to life. He's amazing at that kind of thing. It's certainly not the way I work when I'm writing electronic music. I find I have to mess about and throw things around and see what stakes. Whereas Jason will develop very, very well developed ideas in his mind to be brought to life in our respective studios. The man's a genius. I love him to bits. Hold tight, Jason. So let's talk about constituent parts for this. So let's start with the drums. And originally, going back to first principles, I think I started off with a 909 kick. Just double click into that channel. It's going to take a second because there's always a slight lag. So we used a 909 kick. Let's pass that into the mix. Standard 909 kick. So let's take it from there. Now to me, there's not really enough power in that. A 909 kick is a good thing, but I think I wanted like a more retro but a more modern kick at the same time, something that had that retro drum machine edge but with a bit more punch to it. And the 909 kick that is from, I think that's from an Ableton pack classic drum machines, I'm pretty certain it is actually, just wasn't cutting it when I kind of wanted to get down to it. I wanted something with a bit more bite and a bit more sizzle to it. So we took the 909 kick and I replaced it with that kick. Sounds a little bit woody and a bit more middly, but I was trying to balance that against the sustained low bass and then the staccato bass as well, thinking about where that's going to sit relative to that bass line in the frequency spectrum. So I want something that's got quite a lot of top end. Now this kick is from a sample pack. It's from the SID, it's Sound of Italo Disco. That's a Sample Magic sample pack. Sample Magic make awesome sample packs for all genres, and I'm fairly certain that John from the New Division is instrumental in the kind of like more retro-y ones, like so the Italo ones, the synthwave ones. I think John from the New Division does a lot of work on those, or maybe does all the work on those, and he's a fantastic engineer and producer as well. So these kicks are all super usable right out of the starting blocks. All nice and retro, but got plenty of low end and power to kind of punch through. So from there, let's set that going again, just so we don't run out of space. We'll put some processing on it. So my first piece of processing was an EQ rolling off everything below 30 Hz to make sure that the bass is really doing the low end stuff, and the kick sits in the middle of the bass frequencies. So we've lost some of that top end and we've tightened up that bottom end as well. Now, I started this track using the version 1 of Neutron from iZotope. Highly recommend the Neutron products from iZotope. They're amazing when it comes to helping out with mix downs and frequency masking. So you see I turned that on, it got a little touch brighter. And what we've got there is we've basically got an equalizer scooping out some of the nasties, an exciter, multiband exciter, doing two different things, doing retro on both with different amounts and different blends. So not loads on the saturation. I don't go mental with saturation or distortion in a single plugin. I tend to add it in stages, as you'll see on later parts that I talk through. And then to cap it all off, some compression, digging down, I don't know, maybe 5 dBs. Relatively fast attack, so that snap comes through, but clamping down on that body of the kick. I mean, if we turn these off and listen to these in isolation, so we can hear our kick once it's been treated by the Ableton EQ. I've batched a little bit, no transient shaper, bit of brightness, bit of punch from the exciter, and then I can, on these headphones, I can really feel the body and the weight of that kick come up when I turn that compressor on. That's Neutron. And then something I've started doing relatively recently, I'd say in the last 12-18 months, is I bounce everything, every stem, every individual stem, every bus, everything before it hits the 2-mix stereo output through UAD's oxide tape, just to give it some warmth and some oomph. And what I do is I run it quite hot, compensating the input with the output so it's punching somewhere in the red, because even though it's redlining there, it's not actually redlining internally in terms of your 32-bit floating point loudness. So let's turn that on and see what that does to it. Again, I can just feel the weight in these headphones. I can just feel the weight be added to it by doing that. And I do that to every track. And I find I run out of processing power and UAD resources on a regular basis. So there's a second stage now where I have to freeze and flatten after doing the tape saturation and start again almost with a fresh EQ. So after that, Decapitator. Love Decapitator. It works on everything. It sounds awesome. And again, not doing much. Just 3 on the drive, trimming the output a little bit. They're probably linked. Yes, they're linked, and again, not fully dry wet, so it's just a little bit on the E circuit, Eventide, I think. Again, just a little bit, subtle distortion in tiny little accruing layers on each sound, and it gives you a nice overall sound for your whole mix. And then once we've done that, I always fire up an instance of Neutron. I think by the time I got to this point, Neutron 3 had come out, and I would use this for masking to check against bass lines, so I can do any sort of corrective EQ to scoop out any conflicting frequencies. But we can see that that's kind of punching nicely. That's a nice kick now. So that's the kick processed. Turn it all off. It's good, but it's not weighty enough. There you go. That's got some grunt. So to cut down on processing power now then, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the process out of the mix and I'm going to patch in a flattened version. This is what I had to do towards the end stages when I was just doing final tweaks and levels of EQ. And then I'm going to turn everything off there, including the drum rack. Otherwise the computer will fall over. So that's the kick. And then another element here, just to solo it up, is a hall kick, which is just before the breakdown, or before the drop actually, not before the breakdown. And I'm pretty certain, even though I've flattened this to an audio part now, that will have been a Lexicon 224 reverb. Almost certainly. Unmistakable Lexicon tail. So I'm going to patch that into the mix as well. Now then, onto the original sustained bass part. So this is the bit that we had to fix. I think that moved on from there, so let's just have a quick listen to that with that in the mix. There you go. Let's see that channel. So on this, quite a bit of processing on the bass. So what did we do? So I used this native device, which is a frequency splitter that somebody else has handily built and shared, that uses multiband dynamics, the native multiband dynamics, to split your incoming signal into high, mid and low. Patch that in. Again, making sure the low is really mono. Keep your low end in mono, obviously, for power and for if this ever makes it to a vinyl release. No distortion, no stereo boost. I think I might have just put that on there just to see if I wanted to do anything to those layers. Now then, I've got a low cut that comes on there. Okay, that's because in the second part of this bass, the second part where this bass plays, I want to roll off some low end and automate some low end. So if we look at the low cut and then look at frequency, you can see I start off with taking off nearly 300 Hz off the bottom end and then dropping down to nothing. So they are going to come on of their own accord because that's automated. So I've put the high cut on. So I've got to the high cut, look at the frequency there. Bringing in the high frequencies of this bassline part as we approach the part where the staccato bass drops. And in doing that I had to make some compromises with the other instrumentation that plays in terms of taking their top frequencies down a little bit, but that's the nature of arranging and writing. And again, it starts off low and builds up again in the second part of this before the second staccato drop. So in terms of processing, let's have a look at the processing. So neutron. So we've got an equalizer, just bringing up some of those mid-ranges there, taking a scoop of the nasties out and some sort of resonances there, again with the EQ node number 4 there. Multiband exciter, again just a little bit, not too much, quite a bit on the low end, but that's okay. 2 compressors, not doing a great deal. Do that. And again, not a massive amount coming off with the compressor either. Again, the oxide tape, just to drive it. Really pushing it there. I really wanted to get the tape compression effect of that. But you can see, even though it is way up in the red there, it isn't clipping between the two devices, the compressor. Sidechain compressor doing the ubiquitous 4/4 pump from the 4/4 silent channel we've got at the top. And then the slow cut, again, which we talked about before for this second phase, which will take off the bottom end. Sorry, we're going back to the start there, haven't we? Sorry. Going into the Neutron 3. Taking out some of the resonances there. Let's turn that actually on. But that's literally all it's doing. A little bit of final EQ. Okay, so there we have drums and the sustained bass. So I'm going to patch that in, turn that one off. Again, this is the same bass, just flattened. You can really see the effect that the filter sweeps have on them. particularly in this second part here. So it gets very loud compared to that there. Okay, let's turn off some of those channels to the plugins and save some resources. And that gives us kick and bass. Lovely. Now let's not do staccato bass next. Let's look at the drums. There's quite a bit, but it's because it's doubled up. So I've got some crashes and revs. Oh, okay, that's quite an interesting one actually. So from the very start, place those in. Putting some nice reversed hi-hats. About this time I rediscovered an old track I was really into called Healer by Bushwhacker, and that had got reversed hi-hats in the intro, and I thought, that's a kick-ass idea, I'm going to use that. So we have some, find that intro rev, again with some panning and some sends going on. Let's just solo that out for now. So we're going into revs wise. So we're going into the Go Mid. Go Mid is one of my favourite Ableton native devices. It's brilliant. It's got a killer preset called Go Mid. Sorry, it's the filter delay, and that's the preset is Go Mid. I use that a lot. So we've got that one on there, and then there's some clap echo, but I suspect that is just doing the claps. Yes. You got that lovely movement in left and right. I don't know if you guys can hear that. I'm going to assume you can. So it's the usual processing on this then. So we've got the intro rev. So again, neutron. Taking off quite a bit bottom end. On the right channel there. That's not the right channel. Intro rev. There we go. It's better. Neutron. Again, just taking off the bottom end, boosting the higher mids, sorry, boosting the highs there, taking out the lower sections of the highs. Multiband excitement again. Again, looking at values, 33%, 36%, and 6 dB of each. Subtle. And then some compression with quite a slow attack. Relatively slow. And a quite slow release so that we bring up the tail of those reversed hits, and then into an EQ that doesn't appear to be doing anything. I'm not sure why that's there. And an EQ and then a filter which closes as we get towards the drop. Again, a reverse crash there with a neutron on it, probably just taking off low end and adding some bit of body to it. Yep, that one, that's okay. And then as we move into some slightly more interesting drums where there's a bit more going on, we've got a DMX snare. Where's that gone? Not quite there. Again, feels a bit lightweight. And that's got some... Can we see which reverb that's got? No, we cannot. I think I bounced these wet. Yeah. Yeah, I bounced those wet. I must have had to commit to that at some point. Again, DMX hats. Lindrum snares, which I love to bits. Shaker from the DMX. Lindrum claps and Lindrum cowbell, which doesn't come in quite a bit actually. Love those panning claps, left and right. Let's turn on some processing then. So Crash. Breakdown crash going through a slightly different reverb here. The longest in the world, we'll touch on that later, is what we'll do when I show you how to make reverse effects. But I'm going to rattle through the drums because drums are not all that interesting, are they really? So let's pump everything up. Let's get everything turned on. That's what it's all loading there? Yeah. Get all those off. There we go. Crash bus, turn that on. Bit of top down mixing almost. Okay, so that's everything turned on in there. DMX snare, DMX hats, bit of basic EQ, just taking off the extreme high and low end. Now, when we're working on here, I have selected the DMX hats. You notice I've sidechained the hats. Sorry, the DMX hats to the DMX snare to give a bit of movement and create some space in that frequency range there. All relatively basic stuff, to be honest with you. Not particularly exciting. And the DMX shakers. Let's turn on extreme high cut. Where's the shaker? Let's get to him. I think he's going to be there. You have to forgive me with this one. This is a track. Ah, there we go. Quite splashy, the drums. A lot of high end going on them. Again, sidechaining my sort of more hatsy and shakery elements to the clap and to the snares on the 2 and the 4 beats, just to create a bit of space. Then drum claps. So well, let's put. A bit apologetic, the cowbell. Into the drum process. Right, okay. So I didn't do individual oxides on all these stems, it seems. But I did on the bus. There you go. It's a bit more lively, isn't it? Blue compressor and then a UAD Pultec, just to give it something 200. Quite a bit in the 5. There you go. It's a bit more lively, isn't it? Sorry for rushing through the drums, it's just not that particularly interesting, I don't think, really. There's nothing unusual or unique on the processing on those, I don't think. Again, if anybody's there and they want me to stop and talk about anything, please give me a shout, fire something up in the chat, and I will I'll drop back and explain what you need me to. Okay. Pause that for a second there, turn off all the drum processes, and what I'll do is I'll patch back in the in fact, let's get rid of you altogether, because I've got the drums flattened there. You can see I've had to leave the bus processing on those, but again, I don't think there's anything major on those. Nope, left a couple on there, but that's okay. Okay, let's have a look at staccato bass, because there's a lot more interesting parts in the staccato bass. Let's set loop off. Should be here. And it's a group within a group within a group. And this is coming from a soft synth, it's coming from Omnisphere. And that's running a it's going to take a second to open up. A preset that I've probably tweaked. I've recently upgraded Omnisphere to the latest version, so it's got 3 oscillators, and I'm not sure if I like it. It's a little bit laggy when swapping between things than the other version was, so I'm still getting used to that a little bit. And the user interface is enormous compared to the old version, but there we go. Now, I think on this one, Omnisphere, I remember trying to automate these various parameters, and they weren't doing anything particularly exciting, to be quite honest. And I thought that the ADSR the things I'd usually go for, the controls I'd usually go for, like release and shape and the symmetry of these are for the shape is for the wavetable in Omnisphere. Just show you that quickly. So it's this. You can kind of subtly change the timbre of the wavetable and the oscillator, but it wasn't really doing a lot on this particular patch. Nor was the ADSR. So I thought, well, I'm gonna have to come this a different way. So what I ended up doing was, let's get through all the processing first. So again, the usual neutron. Bit of a dynamic node on the EQ there, so let's turn that on and see what that's doing. Patch on loop. Taking out some there in that 400 not a bit hertz range where it's always nasty. Bit more top end. Double compression, quite a bit on that one. Slowish attack, slow release. Slowish attack, mid-range release on that one, and then a multi-band exciter. Oxide tape again. I felt that again in the headphones. As soon as I turned that on, I felt that bottom end come to life in it. Again, spectrum analyzer, just to I think that was just to see where it was peaking out and how it was looking overall. There's quite a lot of low end in that one, so that's at 25.8 hertz. So there's quite a lot of low end in this compared to the other bass line, which wasn't quite as bassy, which was surprising. And then I made a neutral dry wet rack. This is a rack I got off the internet somewhere. Just search for Ableton neutral dry wet, you'll find it. And what this lets you do is this lets you bang in VSTs that don't have a dry wet control on it, like the Bucket Brigade chorus from UAD. So I'm going to turn this on now and it'll change dramatically. That's gorgeous. I love this delay unit, this chorus unit to bits. It's just unreal. Sounds great on bass guitars, sounds great on bass. It's a fantastic thing, but it lacks a dry wet. So I put it in this rack and I can control the dry wet because I didn't want it to be fully wet in that instance. And then last little thing at the end, a great little plugin, Fielding DSP Reviver adds second and third order harmonics. Again, I felt the weightiness of that bass line go up a level when I turned that on. Clipping a bit, but we're in the channel, so it's not necessarily that much of an issue. Not overly worried about that. And then we've got another bit of staccato bass at the end here, which appears to be a slightly filtered version, which is for the ending. That's what that is for. I feel the low end's just gone from that now. Put the reverb back on. So it's still punchy, even though the low end's gone, it's still punchy and it's delivering that kind of not quite bass area. So then, from there, we've got the rewinds and all the things in here. Yeah, we have. There we go. I couldn't get the ADSR envelopes to do what I wanted, and it wasn't quite feeling. Didn't feel synthesizer-y enough. You know that in a typical synthesizer track, you'll mess about with the cutoff and resonance of the filter. Mess about with the envelopes because that's where you tend to get the most change to the shape and tone of the sound overall. So what I went for is a couple of rewinds where I bounced a note and then rewound them just to give you that lead back into it. And then on the group process, taking off the super low end, so quite high actually, 40.5 hertz, 40.5 hertz. Everything's gone below that with a 24 dB per octave slope on the EQ. So just to tidy it up and stop it being flabby. I think I recall listening to this in the car and thinking that the kicks were really tight and punchy and sounded really, you know, nice and as you'd want to. But the staccato bass felt a bit flabby. That was one of the reasons I went back and did that processing on the bus. So let's get rid of that and then patch in the flattened versions. The flattened versions are just where we've rendered all these processes down into audio, basically, and it's a bit easier on the CPU. So already you can feel that low end is quite tight and quite nice. So it's drums, staccato bass, long rises. Okay, this is part of the effects, and if you can see, it's quite a long effect. So it's 40 odd seconds. That's part of 40, more than 45 seconds to come in. And the way I create these is I use a Max for Live Convolution Reverb Pro. You could use any convolution reverb player. And what I have is I have a little folder down here saved impulse responses. Don't know if you can see that on the left hand side in the browser. And I've got the longest in the world, and it's a place in Scotland that was a former oil storage tank during the war. And what I do is I bounce sounds through that and then reverse them to get these super long swells. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I reverse the sound, bounce them through this reverb, take that entire reverb sound and record it, reverse that back and create a lovely swell, and it sounds like this. There we go, and that's got a send going to it as well. So that's got a bit of, what's that? A, B, C, D, E, send E. So that's going to a hall reverb as well. But this is it's a mono impulse as well. This longest impulse in the world. So your reverb comes in mono, which stops it clouding up your outside and stops it becoming undefined and nasty. And it lends itself to making these really awesome swoops and swells. And I'll be honest, I can't remember what I used as a sound source for that. What I tend to do is I tend to use the first note of a synthesizer part that gets introduced after an 8-bar movement or a 4-bar movement. I'll chop off that first note, reverse it, feed it through the reverb, take the entire reverb sound, reverse that, and play it back into the first note. So there's a few of those. As a verb fall, I probably use something similar. Maybe I use the Lex 224. Sorry, I don't know if I soloed that right. That's just a noise fall through reverb. Just makes it a little bit nicer. And we've got a verb rise. Again, given that that's about, I don't know, I've probably trimmed that down. That's about 20 seconds. I suspect I use the Lex 224 and a hall setting for that at about 20 seconds. That's something I do a lot as well. Another verb fall there is that rise and fall, so you get that. Fall here. What does that sound like when we get there? That's definitely the longest reverberation in the world. I recognise that tone anywhere. But again, if you wanted that, you can search for it. I think it's on Free Sounds. The guy who recorded it's a professor at Salford University, which is just down the road from where I live, and they've got an anechoic chamber there as well. So there's all these different crazy audio files you can download from them and mangle. Again, if I can remember, I will put a link in the description when I put this video on YouTube. So that's some of the rises and falls there. There are some slightly more complicated rises and falls later on, I think. So we'll cover those later. Now then, toms. Toms instantly make something a little bit more 80s for my money, which I think is a good thing personally. So I've got a helpfully labelled a tom build, and then a dish and a dush. Dish, dush, being panned. Yeah. Dish being panned on the right, dush being panned on the left. So let's have a listen at those actually. And again, these are unprocessed now. There you go. Kind of unremarkable as they are. So again, these are Sennheiser tom drums. I think I played these using the push, just a riff I could hear in my head for the build up into the staccato bass up there. So on that we've got the decimart. So I'll tell you what, let's just have a little loop from there. Yep. Utility from a previous instance of Live. I'm not sure what version I started writing this in. This is currently in version 10. I haven't upgraded to 11 yet, and I don't plan to. Endless Smile, which isn't written on the intensity. We'll cover Endless Smile later, I think. And we got some filtering off going on. I think that's in the later build. Oh, it's filtering in the later build. That's okay. So into Decimort. Decimort. I set it to the CMI2 preset, which mimics the Fairlight CMI2, because I'd read somewhere that Jan Hammer used to sample all his toms into his Fairlight when he was doing the Miami Vice soundtrack, and I wanted to be as authentic as I possibly could in software. I think it's probably a similar process for the Dish Dush toms. Just turn on the Decimort. Okay, let's get that at an 8 bar. So again, Neutron. UAD Lexicon. There you go, that sounds a bit more 80s, didn't it, straight away? Let's turn the loop back on for a second. Again, UAD tape running hot. Decapitate. Bit more on the driver this time on the decapitator. Compensating for it on the output with the auto link there as well. Fully wet on the again Eventide, I think. Circuit. Some parallel compression, because I wanted to retain the transients, and I was using one of the old legacy versions of the 1176 compressors from Ableton. So fast attack, but not so fast that it clamps down on the transients, and a fairly fast release as well. All buttons mode, which really smashes it. So you can see the amount of gain reduction we're doing there, because it's set to GR. We're taking off like 10 dBs, but I've given it like 50-50 on the dry wet. So you're still retaining some of the signal. So if we listen to that, I mean, it's vibing, but it's not right. It's a little bit polite, just right. Into a UAD Pultec EQ. Again, these are the legacy versions. I hadn't upgraded these EQs by this point, so what we're doing, we're giving it 5 dBs at 12k, and yeah. That's where we are, so let's patch it up. Again, 3 dB boost, or a 3 boost, I'm not sure if these actually are decibels. You tend to do these by ear at 1000 Hertz, just to give it that brightness. Top end. Take some of the extreme top end off and some of the low bottom off with a standard EQ. And that's your toms processed. Let's drop those out of the mix and patch in the flattened versions. I think they're all bust and ready to go. Yeah, lovely. I feel now that the track's really starting to sort of take shape. Okay, pads. Sometimes I find myself having to use, yeah, there we go, this is why. So we've got the low pad group, which groups the flattened versions and the process versions that I'm going to run us through. But if you look in the low pad process, I've got a pre and post instance of this instrument, and the reason being is I use Endless Smile during build, which is a fantastic little plugin from the guys behind Dada Life. Turn it up and he gets happier, you turn it down and he's sadder. We'll see how that works in a second. But what that does is that generates reverb and delay tails that you don't necessarily want, and if you turn it back down to 0 in the same channel, like if I'd carried on this pad there, for example, it never quite pulls it back as nice as you would like it, and I like to capture those tails. So what I'll have is I'll have a second instance of the instrument that just plays once Endless Smile has reached 100 there. So we can't actually hear that pad, so let's have a listen to that pad. Boom. That's lovely, isn't it? Now this is a very Jules Schimmer instrument. It's the warm analog pad preset on the mono poly. I use this all the time. It's just gorgeous for that low weighted pad sound. But as you can see with this EQ, I take quite a lot out of that. And let's look at Endless Smile for there. Let's bang that into its automation line so we can see that build up. So you can see the Endless Smile builds up at the end here. And there was something else there, so we've got the mixer. So I mute it there as well. So I didn't capture any tails, I muted it. And I muted it pretty early. I muted it on the last beat of that final bar before the drop or the change in this section here. So let's see some other processing. So let's turn on Endless Smile. And then Neutron is probably just doing the usual basic cuts, bringing up some of the mid-range there. Nice. Let's turn him on so we can see what he's doing. Compressor 1. A touch with a transients, if there can be said to be such a thing in a pad. Again, a little bit of compression. And then some multiband excitement as well. And again, UAD oxide tape, just giving it that weight. And it will be exactly the same on these. So I'm just going to turn those on. Well, let's look at what Endless Smile does. Now I've got it set to the extreme one, Dada Dynamite. There are different levels of how extreme you want this effect to be, but listen to it. We're losing the low end there. There's a noise riser and a pitch riser coming in. And what that does is I always feel slightly lazy for using it because it avoids a forest of automation for a reverb and a delay and a pitch riser and then the reverb and delays on those pitch risers. It just does it all in one place. Now there's probably more going on in this build than just that Endless Smile. In fact, I know for a fact there is, but we'll look at that once we've got more of these parts in the mix. So that's the pad, so I'm going to take out the pad process. No, I'm going to leave the pad process actually. No, let's get rid of it. Because there will be more builds. So I'm going to patch in my flattened pads and they should work nicely. Again, I kept the before and after as audio. I'm also noticing that this part is in mono as well, because I've got a high pad that's going to carry the stereo portion of this. Okay, so that's the low pad. Let's have a look at the high pad now. Again, I think it's been probably 18 months since I looked at this, so I don't actually recall what the instrument was on this one. I remember using the mono poly pad for low pad because that's something that I do a lot. So my high pad process is down there. Let's get rid of the flattened ones and show us the process ones. So what are we actually using? Doesn't appear to be anything coming through there. Ah, there you go. So this is Omnisphere. I'm going to say it's probably a preset that I started with. Might have tweaked it in some way. Warm Glue, based on a sample of a Prophet pad and a polysynth from a Virus C blended together. Quite short attacks on the amplitude envelopes to give it a bit of snap though, I suppose there. A lovely sound. I love Omnisphere. It's an unreal synthesizer. So I'll go quickly through the processing on this one then. Let's fire in a loop. That way we're not running away with ourselves. First things first. We're going to get the silent 4/4, but that's not going to. I'm not sure why that's not responding. We'll need to look at that in a second. But that'll disappear when it comes to the process, but that's fine. EQ it. If you look at the EQ curve, do you remember the EQ curve from the warm pad? That was like here. We've got an auto filter that opens up during this part, so you've got the filter opening, adding in more of those high frequencies. What limited ones there are. Endless smile again. Building up at the end. Let's take the loop off. Let's let it play to that. And then a neutron. Oxide tape again, and then I put the Lufticus on it, which is an emulation of the Mag EQ. I just gave it a little bit there, a little bit in the sort of 20k areas to give it some. Depending on your headphones and your speakers, you might not pick up on that, but you can. In my headphones, I can notice it gets noticeably area. There we go. Endless smile. He's getting happier. There we go. And then again, the post drop pad is a little bit later because the high pad doesn't come in for 8 bars until afterwards. So those are the high pads. Let's drop in the flattened ones. Does that make sense that I'm dropping in the flattened ones afterwards and deleting the processes because the computer just can't handle that much going on? Because the computer couldn't handle this project anyway. Never mind when I've got OBS and Twitch and other things running in the background with a slightly different sound card as well. Okay. Oh, the choir. The choir. I started writing the choir part. So let's have a quick listen to the song. You pick out the low pad, pick out the high pad. Toms are nice and clear and punchy and powerful, 80s sounding. Get that whole kick there. You can hear the endless smiles coming in. There we go. So choirs then. Now, the choir I had to do offline, which means that I was working on a stacked choir for this to build in the just before the staccato bass drops in what I think of as the final drop in this track. And there are so many options for choirs in Omnisphere. You've got pop versions of it, actual choirs from churches that have been recorded with gorgeous ambience on them, and there's a one choir that's a Japanese children's choir, or it might be called Japanese kids choir, and it instantly put me in mind of the soundtrack to Akira, and I wanted to add that as a later layer in this to really drive that tension build towards the drop, because it's quite an unsettling noise, I think, and when it's sustained for a long time, it really sets you on edge a little bit, so you're looking for that release to the tension. There we go. With the different elements coming into the choirs, and like I say, I was working on this on the train coming back from Newcastle into Manchester, I think. And the laptop was just running out of processing power, so I had to bounce the choirs into a separate project with a 2-stem mix of all the other elements in the project, and work on it that way and work on it offline. And unfortunately, I don't know where that project is anymore, so all I've got is the final output from it, which was a freeze. But that's okay, because it still sounded awesome, and I think I managed to get the balance of the choirs just right, if I do say so myself. So again, let's have a quick look at some processing on that. Neutron. What are we doing in Neutron? Not quite high enough. I'm finding it quite difficult to work with just one screen. Ordinarily, I've got 2 monitors, and on the other monitor off to this side, I've got OBS at the moment. I'm used to having 2 screens, so I can, move plug-in windows about and things like that. I find it quite difficult to work in a single window. So what are we doing though? In Neutron 5, we're taking out this one, was that some resonance there with the dynamic EQ node, taking off the bottom end, but gradually, quite gently there. some compression, some more compression, and then an exciter. Oxide tape running hot again. Yeah, baby. And then look at the pull tape doing quite a serious boost at about 10k there as well. Some attenuation at 30. Fine. Let's listen to what the pull tape does to it. Oh, you felt that eeriness come out then when I turned it on. Without, with. I suppose it makes it more like a noise swell as well. Adding to that rise. And I think I must have baked in the Endless Smile process into that, because I can hear Endless Smile, the pitch riser and the noise riser that's part of Endless Smile in that as well. Killer little plugin, Endless Smile. I think less than 50 quid. Can't remember where exactly I downloaded it from, but it's by the guys from Dada Life. It was very, very technical. Very, very technical, and come across as lovely fellas on their streams and walkthroughs as well. So let's get rid of the process for that one and patch in the flattened version. Again, doesn't look that much different, maybe slight, well, the envelope doesn't, but the volume does overall, I think. Those lovely tails off to carry you between the sections as well. Very nice. Okay, a sine fall. And legit, I've no idea how I made this, but it's handily. We've got the MIDI here though. So let's have a listen to that. I went for a bit of a treat here. I have no idea what this actually is. Nice. A burbling sample and hold style sine fall. And that's coming from Omnisphere. Electro sine falling. There you go. Must have been a preset, and it's based on a sine, strangely enough, with some modulation, no doubt. Yes. Complicated beast, Omnisphere. It really, really is. But I love it to bits. I love it to bits. So that was that. So all we did was froze that down to audio. What do we do in terms of processing? Neutron. You can imagine that's going to take the bottom end off it. Maybe tidy up the mids a little bit. Bit of boost in the low high. Oxide tape and then decapitator. Ooh, that's interesting. Let's group all those together. Control G. And just see just how different that is before and after. Set a random loop going. Bit long that loop, isn't it? Okay. Didn't quite work in the groupings there because I hadn't selected all the devices. It's just a little bit polite. That's okay. I don't think there's anything on the bus there. That's fine. So if we get rid of the full process. Patch in the flattened version. Again, just carries you between those two sections. We've got a sine rise next, and I'm fairly certain all I did was I took that and reversed it. So let's have a listen at that. That's patched in nicely. This bottom one we're interested in. What's that? Sunset? I'm not quite sure. Because everything is turned off, that's why. Let's turn on the processing. Again, decapitator, endless smile, neutron, the usual suspects in my toolbox. This time I'll give us this tail. This is the flattened version above it. Nice. Let's get rid of that. Turn that on. So we've got the sine rises and sine falls that tie those bits nicely together. The first riff. Quite a complicated one, the first riff, which is the, find my first synths, so let's have a look at the process. Main riff and a pitch down, and then we've got all these effects underneath it, which are quite complicated and take a lot of doing. But let's start at the beginning and see how we get on. So this is how this riff begins. Take us all the way back to the beginning. Pretty nice. That's Omnisphere. Literally my go-to synth, Omnisphere. I think this is based on a couple of samples from Oh no, I was wrong. 85%. From a monopoly, pulse, and one of the inbuilt wavetables is saw square fat. Now I remember again that the ADSR wasn't giving me all that much out of this one. I don't really want to start buggering about with it too much now because it will. Linking them. Let's change it completely. So A and B are linked. So it's not that drastic. It was not that drastic, the envelopes on that, I remember. So again, I had to work up new ways to make the synth interesting and give it movement and motion. But let's start with the processing as always. So we take the bottom end off it. Studio D chorus. It's very subtle. Hey Will, thanks for the message, kidder. Omnisphere's unreal, mate. It's pricey, but it's like, it's enormous, and there's so much more to it as well. There's like a million different sound sources in there, from like samples of oscillators from synthesizers to classic sample CDs from way back when, from the beginnings of music production. So Studio D is a chorus box, just gives it that bit more slightly stereo spatial thing going on with it. I do like it's on the sort of least intense setting of 1 to 4, and you can do all buttons like you can with a lot of the UAD stuff. Why stuck with that? I'm surprised I didn't go with the neutral dry wet to blend that in a bit better, but I must have just liked it, and it does sound pretty good. Auto filter, because there's clearly some automation somewhere. Let's find that. There we go. Yep, there's the filter automation, and then decapitator. Subtle again. A bit of EQ just to roll off. Roll off any tops? Yeah, roll off some of the tops. A bit more at the bottom. Cool. Do have a process. Now we do have a bus on this as well. So at the pitch down, I think even when I was writing this, I think I sampled this. So it'll be so it's this bit we're listening to now. Yeah. I created that as audio. I'm forever bouncing and freezing and flattening bits to create effects and bits and bobs. Right. So then let's have a listen at some bus processing, but let's make it where it's a bit juicier. We've got some auto filter going on, so we've got a bit more to get our teeth into. So we're on the bus and we got neutron. Probably taking out a bit, felt it thin it out slightly then. Yeah, just thinning it out, and a node in there in those that sort of 400 to 500 hertz range where it can get a bit nasty. Oxide tape, probably running it hot again. Since doing this project, I've set up an Ableton rack. I don't know if you guys know about Ableton racks, where you can assign both of these input and output to a single knob, that as you turn up the output drops by corresponding decibel value. Allows you to control just the signal a bit better then. Frequency splitter, I'm not sure what this is doing. On the high, let's scroll over a little bit. And maybe a knock on the stereo there. Couple of dBs boosting that mid-side stereo EQ there. Nothing in the mids, and obviously mono in the lows. Decapitator. Again, decapitator on a decapitator can sometimes introduce artifacts, and it does slightly in this one, but I heard an Eric Prydz song that did the same thing, so I was like, you know what, I'm leaving it. And then UAD Pultec, what we doing? 5 boost at 10,000 that is, 10 kilohertz. 6 attenuation at 20, so taking off from the bottom end as well. Took me a while to get my head around the Pultec EQs. I'm glad I finally have now. Do them by ear rather than by eye. Same with the Manly Massive Passive as well when I use that. Just felt that open up then. Alright. Where do you work out? I don't work out well. Stuff that. Neutron. I'm not entirely sure what I was trying to achieve here. They're just nodes in there. I've not actually made any cuts. There's some these nodes were put in, these dynamic nodes were put in on the EQ to counteract the stacking of the effects of the decapitation on the decapitator, because they were making like aliasing kind of noises. They weren't particularly nice, so that's what I was trying to resolve with those there. Fixed it as best I could and then decided it was okay and I could live with it. And I believe that is it, so let's stop that there for a second and get rid of that, and then we'll patch in the flattened version. Okay, flattened, take it off solo, bring that in. Where were we? All the bus processing's on. But you can hear that distortion from the multiple decapitators and the saturation in there as well. I just think that's lovely. I think that's really, really nice. Alright. The first riff FX. Now this involved a lot of bouncing down to audio, so I don't think that's going to be that complicated actually looking at it. So it's literally some... Bang that in. Sort that up. It's just literally some... Take your first note, duplicate it. I'll tell you what, let's patch that in so we can hear that and see that as well. Okay, so this is the main riff of the synthesis of the that we've just been listening to. We can hear that almost not quite nastiness there. That was the bit that was in an Eric Prydz track that I heard on the radio, and I thought, you know what, if it's okay for Eric Prydz, it's okay for me. But you see, with the pitch down, what I've done is that I've taken the first note in MIDI of this riff, bounced it down to audio, cropped it so it's just a single note, reversed it, fed it through a delay, captured the output of that delay, flipped it back on itself, and then re-imported it, and that's these here. That's a delay rev. Does that make sense? And then a filter delay one there as well will be kind of similar. So I took the first note from this section at bar 113, reversed it, fed it through the filter delay, captured the output of the filter delay, reversed that, and you've got a nice swell. The reason I like doing that is it makes all your swells in key with each other, rather than sticking in something you get from a sample pack or something like that. It makes your track more cohesive, I think, if you make your own things like that. And it's not difficult once you get into the habit of it either. And we've got the huge rev, which again I'll have taken the first note from bar 153 and I will have fed that, again, bounced it down to audio, reversed it, cropped it, fed it through this massive reverb, captured that reverb, flipped that back on itself, so I've got a long swell, and then re-imported it. I'm going to turn that off actually while There you go, and that's, like I say, that's in key with the rest of your tune. It matches the instrument that you're putting it against. It's just a fantastic way of making up risers, I think. I don't think that the processing on these is going to be anything special. Again, it's more Pultex and decapitators, adding some top end in, lower top end there really. But I'm just going to get rid of the process for those and just use the flattened ones. I'm going to move over those pretty quickly, because I'm conscious time is ticking on. It's been an hour and I was hoping to have this boxed off in under an hour. So that's my first rinse synths, yes. First rinse effects, flattened, yes, that's good. Now the second riff synths. The second riff, again, is something Jason came up with and we just fed it through the... again, I'm going to say it was Omnisphere. Surprise, surprise, it's Omnisphere. Bet you didn't see that one coming. And what does that look like? So let's have a quick listen at that. And again, Omnisphere, just, it wasn't, the envelopes weren't doing much, the filter wasn't doing much on this particular patch. So this is Tom and Dave's Polyplow, so that'd be Tom, that's an Oberheim and Dave Smith thing, isn't it, basically? So yeah, so we got some stereo saws from the OB8. as an audio sample, not as a wavetable. And again, some oscillators that have been recorded from the Prophet 5 as well. But the filter cutoff and the envelopes weren't doing much. So again, I had to get creative with this one. But I got a lot more creative with this one. And what I did was I rendered the entire thing down to audio, duplicated it first because I don't want to get rid of anything when I'm doing these things. So I duplicate it, bounce it down to audio, and then I use the slice to MIDI function in Ableton, which is a great thing because what that then does, it's like the old Rex and Recycle thing would be in Reason. I don't know what the other versions of that might be in Cubase or in Logic, but it's like, I think it's like an Akai sampler thing almost, where you take your audio sample and it chops it up based on the transients or however you tell it, and it maps each of those slices to a drum pad in a drum rack. So you get, turn it on, some nice reverses, and rather than that being, because if you were to bounce that's say 8 bars that synth riff down to audio and then reverse it, it would just be the thing backwards. What I wanted the hits to be in the same position that they were, but with the hits backwards. And then what I did with that was what you get is you get this. I'll try and solo this up actually. So see it playing through those there in this MIDI part. And this will maintain the sort of rhythm of your riff. A great way of extracting groove from drums and other parts as well. This. So those are my reverses. When I patch those in against the synth, they make it a bit more interesting. So it's not quite ADSR. So maybe somebody who's listening to this who knows a thing or two about synthesizers might think, "Oh, I wonder how they've done that." It's not an obvious way of working. And I'm forever using this deactivated thing, so all I do in Ableton is I can either right click and deactivate it, which is there, or I can press 0 on my keyboard. And that works with notes as well. It's a cracking way of getting rid of information without actually deleting it, because you might want to come back to it later. So some basic reverses, and then I did a basic slice here. I can't remember what the difference was now. It's been 18 months since I thought about nothing because it's muted. So it's got like a shorter envelope to it, that one. And then I patched it through an ARP to sort of re-trigger the MIDI. So we've got patching the ARP one again, so that's gonna so it makes it a little bit crazy. Maybe this one's probably a better one to show. Of course the arpeggiator's not working, it's not turned on. There we go. So you're adding stutters and things to it and reverses and little interest to the part. So not going to go through the process and everything because it's probably pretty much the same thing that I always do, but we'll talk about the synth, so let's have a listen at that. Taking off some of the low end there, and then a compressor. Stuck with native Ableton compressor, something I don't do very often unless I'm sidetuning. Oxide tape. Again, I felt like I get weightier in my headphones then. Another instance of neutron. What are we doing with that? Taking some of the top end off. Some compression. Although not a lot, but that might change as the sound develops. Decapitator. Again, just a little bit. A little bit. I don't go mad with distortion unless I'm trying to achieve a certain aesthetic. And the Pultec. What are we doing? Significant boost at 10 again. Just brings out those little plucky high bits. And that's the second riff there. Okay. And then patching the flattened one so we've got something to actually listen to. Of course there's no process on them, is there? Ooh. Well, there's so much more here to say, actually. There's the... I accidentally created a noise arpeggiator. I was just trying out different sounds and different oscillators on the on Omnisphere, and it came up with this. And I just like that. I thought that there's a bit of excitement, but it's subtle because it's just low in the mix. Ah, there we go. There's a noise 16 says the other one. It's almost like video game noises, but I've listened to other producers layer stabbing synths underneath like chorus parts in vocals and things like that to add energy to it and emphasis to it as well. And I just kind of, by accident, ended up doing this myself. If I hadn't told you it was there, you probably wouldn't have noticed it. Let's make sure we got full processing on everything. Yep, got everything there. That's cool. So that's second riff synthesizers. Second riff effects, I'm pretty sure that's going to be, again, it's only one swell. And it looks like a delay swell, which is quite rhythmic to me, that. Let's have a quick listen at that. There you go, yeah. So if you patch in the second riff synth. And all I've done is I've taken that first note from one of the parts of bar 165, again, bounced it down to audio, flipped it, cropped it, fed it through the delay, captured the output of the delay, converted that to audio, reversed that, flipped it back in time to make that swell. So let's... Send the processing back on. I'm going to gloss over that again, but you can see the kind of things I do again. It's that subtle saturation with tape, maybe a touch of distortion, not much at all. Sure. No, push, can't hear it. There we go. That time, that's the one. Okay. Radio. I think I just wanted some noise and some dirt in there to stop it sounding too clean. I really dislike really sterile recordings and sterile pieces of music that have come out of a computer that have got like no dirt in them whatsoever. I think a little bit of dirt and a bit of noise in your oscillators or a noise layer makes a world of difference. And this is just something that I put together. I'm pretty sure this was based on one of the sound sources in Omnisphere. Just a note that you play and it makes radio-esque noises. Yeah, there we go. Just to make a swell. And just to give a different tonality to it as well. So I'm gonna... What are we doing with the Pultec? What are we doing? Again, a 5 and a bit boost in that sort of 10k area. Just to give it a bit of sparkle. Some auto filters, which appear to be automated, are they? Yeah, they are. There we go. So let's get rid of the process ones. Patch in the flattened ones and make sure that they're all processing is turned on, and it is. That's cool. Cool. All right. And again, you can see that the parts tend not to change that much. You can still see the swell in the rise. This one changes slightly because of the filter automation on it. How does that sound in the mix? Just adds texture and interest. Okay. That's all the major parts done and dusted. So, with the exception, some tape hiss. Always put some tape hiss in. I mean, I can barely hear that, but once the mastering engineer's limiter's got hold of that, he brings it up in the mix. It's subtle. It's subtle, but it's there. There's a couple of devices in Ableton that also do like noise outputs as well. Echo, you can add noise into that, which I really like. So that was how Hardwave was put together. A couple of mixing tools down the bottom. What I have here is I have a channel of pink noise. It's a really high quality audio file of some pink noise. And what I do is I bring this up in the mix. Because pink noise is a really pleasing profile to mix into, so you get the bounce of highs and lows in that. Is a really pleasing to the ear. I'll show you that in a second once we do the drop. So that's it. I mean, it came a long way from... Quite a long way from that, isn't it? Okay, I guess I'll show you my master channel then and mixing tools and what we do now. On my master, I don't have anything that imparts any change to the sound. It's not something I do. I'm not saying I never would, but I knew this was going to a mastering engineer. So I didn't do anything with it. So on the master channel, what have we got? So we've got, okay, it's a good one. This first device is a utility, and if I press the key M, it turns it on. And it forces the signal into mono. And I'm always checking between mono and stereo mixes when I'm doing mix downs to make sure it translates on both, because some people are going to listen to this on an iPhone speaker or an iPad speaker, some people are going to listen to this on a Bluetooth speaker that's mono, some people might listen to it in the car where it is stereo or on nice headphones or on average headphones or whatever. I don't want it to translate well. I check mixes on a lot of different devices, but this is one thing I do in the studio, is to check it in mono. So this is it mono, and that's it stereo. Next, I've got this bass checker. And what this is I can roll the top end off, and for that room next door effect, so you can check out how the kick and the bass line are interplaying with each other, and see how they sit together, and make sure they're gelling and they're not clashing too much. And that's assigned to a knob on one of my controllers. So I can just turn it up and down that way. We turn it off though because we're bouncing audio. I had Ozone 9 on this when I was doing a not to do anything, just not to change the sound in any way, shape or form. But I was doing some EQ matching where this reference audio was a previous version and the target audio was the current version of the track I was mixing on. So that would be a previous version, that would be the current version. Although not necessarily this version that we're listening to now. And again, I mentioned pink noise before. You can show pink noise as a reference against it. So pink noise has got this profile in the spectrum. Your 6 dB guide, or the reference audio, which again has got that profile. So looking against pink noise, we're going to be a little bit low in some of these areas. But again, this is from an old session, and probably doesn't apply to either of these. Doesn't apply to this version that's playing in the background now. Let's turn that off. VPS scope. I just use this to make sure I'm not getting a sausage wave where there are no transients whatsoever. It doesn't really happen much during mix downs and engineering, but it might do if I was doing any. If I was forcing the kick and the bass too much, or maybe I had them grouped through the same compressor, which is something I've done in the past on other tracks. Okay, next instance of VPS is the waterfall version. Now I'm always looking at this to see clash between kick and bass, so if I roll off my top end, turn that back on. I mean, it's generally better if I were to solo the kick and the bass, but I'm not going to back up and solo those now, but you get the picture. It gives you an idea visually of how all your different parts sit against each other. So let's do that. So there's my kicks. So there's a little bit of subharmonic content there, a little bit below 40, because this projector, as they call it here, is set at 40 Hz. We can move that up and down using this. So let's set it back to 40 Hz, because that then tells us when we rotate it what is below 40 Hz. So not a great deal. We're not losing headroom because of that. And then let's patch in the staccato bass, because that's what's playing. But we can do that with all the various parts. A little bit of low end in the old cowbells there. But you get the idea. It's a visual mix tool. And again, going back to the pink noise that I mentioned, if we bring up the pink noise, have I got that mapped? Yes. You can see the different elements disappearing beneath the upper level of the pink noise, and you can hear what's poking out beyond the pink noise, and I find that's a good way of getting a nice balance mix. Not necessarily a good mix or a clear mix or a detailed mix, but a balance mix. It's a good way to establish balance. You take all these various tools at your disposal and use them all to arrive at what you think is the best mix. That's pink noise. Let's go back to the old master channel. Room correction. Okay, as you can see behind me, my room is acoustically treated. But there is still a slight problem. There is a spike at 110 Hz. So let's unsolo that. And it's noticeable, but it's not that drastic. But when I've left this on by accident when I've sent files over for review and things like that, and they just sounded terrible in real life. Yeah, there's just something lacking to it, isn't there? Well, that's just to correct the spiking freak, so that the rooms generate at this position where I'm sat. I tested that using a reference mic. It was a painstaking process, but it had to be done, and I'm glad I did it. Yuli meter. Not particularly for any other reason other than just curiosity, just to see where we are. 22, 21 lufs. But then again, though, you know, if you look at my master, let's tab around into that. You look at my master, I got bags of headroom, bags and bags and bags of headroom. But again, that's for the mastering engineer to get hold of and shove it up without sacrificing dynamics too much. He did a very good job with the mastering bit, Funk, actually. Very, very good job. I think the mastered version of Hardwave, the release version, sounds unreal on a big system. It really does. Master spectrum, just to see. Restream, which talks to OBS, which is how I'm talking to you now. And then we've got the tonal balance plugin. Minus it up just to see where we are. In broad. Bit low in the low mids. Bit high in the high mids, but again, it's about getting a balance. Oh, that's the bass header. Let's put it back into EDM. There you go. So it's not perfect, but it's nice and balanced, and it sounds the way I want it to sound. All the elements sound nicely blended together. And that, in a nutshell, well, in an hour and a half nutshell, that started an hour late, that is Hardwave. So thanks to those of you who are still with me. I appreciate that might have been a bit dry if you're not unable to nerd. And I kind of realised halfway through I was showing you how processing each stem would be a bit dull and a bit tedious. Hence me glossing over a few things, but there we go. So that was how Hardwave came together. It took a while to get there, that one. I wanted it to be absolutely spot on. But once that one was there, the rest of the EP fell in around it quite nicely. Once this is played out, I'm going to sign off. Thank you very much. I said I wasn't going to have a drink this weekend. I'm probably going to have a beer after this. Thank you very much for joining me. Love you all lots. You're all awesome. And I will see you soon, hopefully. Take care, guys.